And dear colleagues and delegates, it's good to be here today to speak about a top priority for the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, and for the German presidency of Markus Plyer, who unfortunately can't be with us here today. As Executive Secretary, I will be speaking on his behalf. The FATF has been focusing on combating terrorist financing for 20 years now, and has built up considerable experience from among the operational agencies of the 200+ member governments of the FATF global network. In recent years, we have seen the scope and nature of the threats evolve and intensify. Money and money laundering fuels organized crime and terrorism, targeting funding methods by groups and individuals targeting funding methods and using financial intelligence has proved invaluable in fighting terrorism by groups and individuals. And this is why preventing terrorism is so crucial and why the FATF has a part to play and, as Tom said, needs to continue to evolve its approach. The FATF sets global standards to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. This includes on implementing the financial provisions of UN Security Council resolutions on terrorism. We evaluate how effectively or ineffectively sometimes countries do this and how they investigate and prosecute terrorist financing. And we provide guidance for governments to help improve their capabilities and the effectiveness of their response. The rise of far-right terrorism and the financing behind it is a threat that we're all rightly concerned about. And as you know, in recent years, many countries have seen a surge in such attacks. This dramatic increase is a threat that needs to be urgently addressed. In June this year, under the German presidency, the FATF started examining the funding models that enable ethnically or racially motivated terrorism, fueled by far-right ideology. This project is still in its early stages. Once completed, it will raise awareness about the specific risks to look out for. It will allow law enforcement agencies, financial intelligence units, and others to better tailor their responses. And it will improve the awareness of the private sector and their responses. This is important as we need the private sector to engage. We need the private sector to enhance their ability to better detect suspicious transactions related to terrorist financing and to help the authorities target suspected individuals or groups. Far-right terrorist attacks may involve small cells or radicalized individuals with simple financial patterns. However, these groups and unorganized collectives, as we have heard, can often receive funding from a much broader range of sources. From supporters and sympathizers, from the making and sharing of propaganda material and merchandise, and from events such as music festivals, as we've heard. The funding is diverse, can involve multiple parties, and is always and often rather across borders. There are, though, big gaps in our collective knowledge, and also, as we've heard, in the definition and in the statistics available in this area. But we know that no small amount of finance is required to promote this far-right ideology, and creating and maintaining websites with racist and hate-fueled content, the organizing of underground events, all require money. Those engaging in crime and with links to organized criminal groups present a risk to be examined. Engagement with criminal groups can help terrorists obtain weapons and facilitate other illicit activity. By following the money, investigators can help build cases and obtain prosecutions. Banks, money transfer systems, and major crowdfunding platforms have become more aware of the risks. They have taken action to detect these kinds of financial networks. This is a positive development, but it means far-right terrorists could shift to newer and less regulated methods to move funds. Already, we have received reports about donations with cryptocurrencies. The FATF took action just last year to regulate virtual asset service providers in the crypto industry. We're working with industry to ensure that they remain vigilant. Our final report into the financing of far-right terrorism will be released next year, and I know that FATF partners from the German delegation are also attending today, and I want to take this opportunity to thank them for putting so much effort into this project and making it one of the top priorities of the FATF this year. The project will present a global picture of the situation, reflecting collaboration across our global network, financial intelligence units, law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and public authorities will all provide input. By better understanding how terrorism is funded, we can continue to evolve and tailor the response accordingly to be effective. And ultimately, we can help stop attacks. The FATF will continue to lead global efforts to raise awareness, and we will continue to call on countries to effectively implement the FATF standards to tackle this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lewis, for this very interesting presentation, and wonderful to see that the FATF has taken up the mantle. I really appreciate that you took the time to be with us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce our second speaker in this panel, David Wells from CTED. David Wells managed the Political Analysis and Research Unit at the United Nations Counter Terrorism Executive Directorate, CTED. This unit coordinates CTED's identification and monitoring of trends in counterterrorism and terrorism, including by working with CTED's Global Research Network, GRN, and regularly publishes analytical reports based on this research. Prior to joining CTED in September 2017, David had more than 10 years counterterrorism experience as a practitioner and researcher, working for UK and Australian intelligence agencies and Australia's leading foreign policy think tank, the Lowry Institute for International Policy. Mr. Wells, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. The screen is all yours.
Thanks, Hans. Let me just share the slide that I have. All right, hopefully that's working okay. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'd like to begin by echoing the thanks of the governments of Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom and Norway for organising today's event, and of course our good friends at the Counter Extremism Project. Extreme right-wing terrorism, or REMT, is an issue that my team and many of my CTED colleagues have been increasingly focused on over the last 18 months. This work culminated in the publishing of 2 CTED Trends Alerts in April and July, and an open briefing of the Counter-Terrorism Committee in October this year. We welcome the initiative of the German government in partnership with CEP to help build international momentum in addressing the many aspects of this unique challenge. Given the limited time available, I'll try to focus on 3 key findings from CTED and the committee's work on the financing of extreme right-wing terrorism. Firstly, and as we've already heard many times today, there are significant gaps in our knowledge of how this form of terrorism is financed. The extreme right-wing terrorism threat is not new, but it has emerged on the radar of many member states relatively recently. What is clear, however, is that member states are increasingly aware of the need for more information, particularly regarding the transnational nature of this movement. This need was made particularly clear in CTED's work with the 1267 committee in producing June's report on actions taken by member states to disrupt terrorist financing. We welcome the current FATF project, which David has just briefed us on, and which CTED is pleased to be supporting to help fill these gaps. And as Hans said, we continue to work with members of our global research network to strengthen our analysis of this challenge. Secondly then, despite these gaps, our analysis has shown the impact that the unique characteristics of this phenomenon can have in the CFT space. There are a wide variety of groups with varied structures and differing ideologies and tactics that could be included under the umbrella term of extreme right-wing or REMT. This makes consistent and accurate terminology even more difficult. What we know from our engagement with our partners is that these groups are using a variety of fundraising methods, including direct donations, merchandise sales and concerts, online gaming and crowdfunding. But typically, and as we've heard, this isn't where the terrorism threat is emerging. Most of the terrorist plots and attacks connected to this ideology have been planned and conducted by lone actors. As we know, this presents CFT challenges, particularly when many of these attacks have been self-funded at a relatively low cost. But this also means that designation, which of course unlocks a huge range of CFT responses to disrupt these groups' activities, is harder to pursue. We do know, however, that several member states have made welcome recent progress in this regard. Thirdly, and finally then, what more can we do to respond to these gaps and challenges? It is clear that any coordinated international or regional response must be centered on an analysis by individual member states of the extent and relevance of this threat. Where appropriate, It should then also be included in their national CT and CFT strategies, in the strategic analytical work of FIUs, and in the context of public-private partnerships. It's particularly vital that the private sector is given guidance on red flag indicators to help them better monitor international transactions, and we welcome the work of RUSI in this regard that we heard about earlier from Tom. We recognise that the lack of common terminology and relative rarity of national designations may present significant challenges, particularly with regard to key elements in international CFT cooperation, including requests for mutual legal assistance, third-party requests, asset freezing, and information sharing. But as we have heard today, it is clear that now is the time to address some of these challenges, particularly as the threat posed by extreme right-wing terrorism continues to grow and evolve, including in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has caused and will cause untold economic damage. This will potentially impact the resources available for counter-terrorism moving forward, but while also in the short term at least, increasing the attractiveness of the abuse of anonymous virtual assets. It is therefore vital we take the necessary steps now to enable the international community to monitor and respond to this evolving terrorist financing threat. The exchange of good practices will be central to this response, so I'd like to thank the organisers again for today's timely event and look forward to the opportunity for a very brief Q&A session.